On January 27, 1945, soldiers of the Soviet 60th Army entered the gates of Auschwitz concentration camp. They encountered approximately 7,000 emaciated prisoners who had been abandoned by the SS, along with the haunting evidence of systematic murder: 600 corpses, 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 articles of women's clothing, and 7 tons of human hair. This date, which marks the liberation of Auschwitz, has become International Holocaust Remembrance Day, observed worldwide by the United Nations and commemorated in nations around the globe. Between 1940 and 1945, approximately 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz. Of these, 1.1 million were murdered in what became history's most infamous death camp. Yet even in this place designed for death, sparks of hope flickered in the darkness. Stories of extraordinary courage, resistance, and human dignity emerged from the ashes. These are 3 of those stories that few people know, tales that remind us that even in humanity's darkest hour, the light of hope could not be completely extinguished. In September 1940, Polish resistance fighter Witold Pilecki undertook one of the most audacious acts of courage in history. At age 39, he deliberately walked into a Nazi street roundup in Warsaw with one singular purpose: to be arrested and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. Armed with a false identity card under the name Tomasz Serafisky, Pilecki was transported to Auschwitz on September 21, 1940, where he became prisoner number 4,859. This was not a tragic mistake or terrible misfortune. This was his choice. Pilecki's mission was to infiltrate the camp, gather intelligence about Nazi atrocities, organize a resistance movement among prisoners, and send reports to the outside world. At the time, little was known about Auschwitz, which had only recently opened. The Polish underground hoped that with accurate information, they could organize either an uprising from within or a military assault from outside to liberate the camp. Inside Auschwitz, Pilecki endured nearly 3 years of starvation, disease, and brutality. He witnessed unspeakable horrors: the murder of Soviet prisoners of war, the construction of gas chambers, the systematic extermination of Jews. Yet he never wavered from his mission. Pilecki organized an underground resistance network called ZOW, the Związek Organizacji Wojskowych, which connected smaller resistance groups throughout the camp. Over 7 months, his team built a secret radio transmitter from smuggled parts and broadcast intelligence about arrivals, deaths, and camp conditions until autumn 1942, when they dismantled it, fearing discovery. Pilecki's reports, smuggled out through released prisoners and radio transmissions, provided the Allies with some of the earliest and most detailed intelligence about the Holocaust. His messages described the gas chambers, the selections, sterilization experiments, and mass murder on an industrial scale. Beginning in November 1940, information about genocide in the camp was sent to the Home Army headquarters in Warsaw. From March 1941, Pilecki's reports were forwarded to the Polish government in exile in London and through them to British and Allied governments. The hope Pilecki brought to Auschwitz was not naive optimism. It was active resistance. His network assassinated SS officers, sabotaged camp facilities, copied and smuggled out records, and maintained communication with the outside world. He raised morale among Polish political prisoners by bringing news from beyond the barbed wire, reminding them they had not been forgotten. When the Gestapo intensified efforts to destroy his network in 1943, Pilecki made the dangerous decision to escape. On the night of April 26th to 27th, 1943, he broke out of Auschwitz, hoping to personally convince Home Army leaders to launch an uprising. His comprehensive report, written in 1945 and now known as Witold's Report, stands as one of the most important historical documents of the Holocaust. Poland's chief rabbi Michael Szudrik later wrote, "When God created the human being, God had in mind that we should all be like Captain Witold Pilecki." Though the Allies tragically failed to act on his warnings, Pilecki's voluntary imprisonment demonstrates that hope in Auschwitz was not passive waiting for rescue, but active defiance against evil. In autumn 1943, young Jewish woman Roza Robota, working in Auschwitz-Birkenau's clothing depot, received an extraordinary request. The Jewish underground wanted her help smuggling gunpowder from the Weichsel Union Metalwork Munitions Factory to the Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to work in gas chambers and crematoria who were planning an uprising. Discovery meant immediate torture and death. Roza said yes. She recruited 3 women from the factory's gunpowder section: 32-year-old Ella Gertner, Regina Safirsztajn, and 19-year-old Ester Wajcblum. Approximately 20 other young Jewish women, aged 18 to 22, joined, including Ester Wajcblum, Esther's 14-year-old sister, Phage Siegel, Mala Weinstein, Hadassah Zlotniska, and Rose Grunethil-Meth. Under constant guard, these women smuggled gunpowder 1 to 3 teaspoons at a time, wrapping tiny amounts in cloth or paper, hiding them in dress hems, handkerchiefs, or rubbing the material on their bodies. For over a year and a half, they persevered despite daily searches that could mean death. One prisoner recalled, "One day Ester Wajcblum handed me a small parcel. A few days later, Roza came for it. This happened several times. I later found out the parcel contained gunpowder. Ester only once said to me, 'We could free ourselves from this hell.'" Roza passed the gunpowder to Sonderkommando members who fashioned crude grenades from sardine tins and created demolition charges. They also made knives and small axes, hiding them throughout the crematoria. On October 7, 1944, at 3 p.m., the revolt erupted. Sonderkommando attacked SS guards with axes, hammers, stones, and improvised explosives. They set Crematorium IV ablaze, and it crumbled to the ground as gunpowder and grenades stored in the walls ignited. Prisoners cut barbed wire fences and escaped into the forest. 3 SS men were killed and more than 10 wounded. At Crematorium II, prisoners saw the flames and joined the revolt. Though approximately 250 prisoners were killed, they permanently destroyed Crematorium IV. The Nazis never rebuilt it. The SS arrested Roza, Alla, Regina, and Esther. For weeks they endured all kinds of torture. These women, some barely out of their teens, refused to reveal a single name. Resistance member Noah Zabludovic visited Roza after months of torture. On the cold cement lay a figure like a heap of rags. She told me she had not betrayed anyone. She wished to tell her comrades they had nothing to fear. We must carry on. On January 6, 1945, 3 weeks before liberation, the 4 women were publicly hanged. Ayla was 32, Regina not yet 30, Roza no older than 24, and Esther just days shy of her 20th birthday. As they placed the noose around Roza's neck, she cried out, "Be strong and courageous, and sisters, revenge." This was Auschwitz's last execution. Their teaspoons of gunpowder, smuggled day after day, became teaspoons of hope. The Sonderkommando faced perhaps the most psychologically torturous fate at Auschwitz. These primarily Jewish prisoners were forced to facilitate the murder of their own people, helping maintain order before the killings, then entering gas chambers to remove bodies, extract gold teeth, cut hair, and burn corpses. The SS routinely murdered them every few months to eliminate witnesses. Of approximately 2,000 men who served in the Sonderkommando, only about 100 survived the war. Yet in the midst of this unspeakable horror, these men created hope for the future through an extraordinary act of witness. The Sonderkommando knew they would likely not survive. They understood that the Nazis intended to leave no witnesses to their crimes. Italian survivor Primo Levi later recounted being told by an SS guard upon arrival in 1944, "However this war may end, we have won the war against you. None of you will be left to bear witness, but even if someone were to survive, the world will not believe him." The Nazis were counting on the world turning away, on evidence being destroyed, on stories being dismissed as impossible exaggerations. But the Sonderkommando refused to let history be erased. Using their position in the crematoria, they acquired paper, bottles, and cans. Under constant threat of discovery and death, they wrote. They documented what was happening in meticulous detail. They created records of their experiences, wrote notes for their families, and carefully recorded the numbers of people murdered in the gas chambers. Zaman Grodowski, one of the resistance leaders, wrote, "In the course of our work, every one of us had cremated a few of our relatives and acquaintances separately. We gathered up the ashes of each person separately and buried it in cans. These men were creating graves for those who had no graves, markers for those who would have no markers." Marcel Najeri from Greece buried handwritten testimony that wasn't discovered until 1980. Others hid their writings in the earth around the crematoria and gas chambers, bearing truth for a future they might never see. Most remarkably, in August 1944, Alberto Herrera, a Sonderkommando member, risked his life to take 4 photographs from inside and near the gas chambers. Unable to aim properly, he shot from the hip, capturing images of prisoners being marched to the gas chambers and bodies being burned in open pits. He smuggled the film out in a toothpaste tube with the help of the Polish resistance. These photographs, though grainy and partially obscured, are the only photographic evidence in existence that documents what happened at the gas chambers. Hundreds of these hidden testimonies were discovered after liberation by the Red Army and during excavations by the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. The writings reveal men struggling with overwhelming guilt, questioning whether survival itself was a betrayal, yet determined that the world would know. One wrote of coming across his own family members' bodies and burning them separately, gathering their ashes in containers for proper burial later. Another described how psychological shock drove one Greek Sonderkommando member to jump into a burning pit rather than continue the work. Their documentation was an act of hope, a belief that justice would eventually come, that truth would matter, that humanity would care. They were creating a future in which their testimony would be heard, believed, and remembered. Even as they were forced to participate in genocide, they resisted by becoming historians and witnesses. They transformed their unspeakable suffering into sacred testimony, ensuring that the 1.1 million murdered at Auschwitz would not be forgotten. To know these stories of hope from Auschwitz is to carry both burden and light. The burden is the knowledge of what happened in that place, the industrial-scale murder of innocents, the systematic destruction of human dignity, the depths to which hatred can drive humanity. It is painful to know that human beings created a system designed specifically for mass extermination, that children were murdered upon arrival, that families were torn apart and sent to gas chambers within hours of their deportation. Yet these stories of hope reveal something equally important, that even in hell, human beings chose courage over despair, resistance over submission, witness over silence. Witold Pilecki could have fled Poland or hidden safely, but he chose to walk into Auschwitz to fight from within. Roza Robota, Gertner, Regina Safirsztajn, and Ester Wajcblum could have kept their heads down and tried to survive, but they chose to risk everything, smuggling explosives teaspoon by teaspoon. The Sonderkommando could have simply tried to endure their nightmarish work, but they chose to document the truth for a future they might never see. Hope in Auschwitz was not passive optimism or naive belief in human goodness. It was active defiance, creative resistance, determined witness-bearing, and the refusal to let evil have the final word. It was building a radio transmitter from smuggled parts. It was hiding gunpowder in dress hymns. It was burying testimony in tin cans. It was choosing to act even when success seemed impossible, even when death seemed certain. These stories matter because they remind us that we always have choices, even in the darkest circumstances. They teach us that resistance comes in many forms: organizing underground networks, smuggling intelligence, documenting atrocities, destroying crematoria, or simply refusing to break under torture. They show us that hope is not something we wait to receive, but something we create through our actions and our choices. On January 27th, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we honor not only the 1.1 million who were murdered at Auschwitz, but also those who resisted, who fought back, who bore witness, who smuggled hope into hell itself. We remember that the obligation to say, "Never again," rests with each of us. We remember that standing against injustice, speaking truth, and defending human dignity are not optional when we witness persecution and hatred. We remember that hope is not a feeling, but a decision, not a gift, but a creation, not passive, but active. The pain of knowing what happened at Auschwitz should not paralyze us with despair. Instead, it should motivate us to be like Pilecki, choosing courage over comfort. Like Roza and her companions, choosing resistance over resignation. Like the Sonderkommando, choosing witness over silence. Their hope, forged in the darkest place humanity has ever created, lights our way forward. It challenges us to ask, what will we choose when faced with injustice? What hope will we create? What witness will we bear?